David Engwicht is a passionate designer, artist, author, communicator, and social inventor, best known as the creator of the walking school bus. He has over 25 years' experience in placemaking. PPS describe him as one of the world's most inventive thinkers on creating vibrant public spaces. Nothing gives him greater joy than working with communities to breathe new life into dead spaces. In this episode, we talk about his creative vision for life, public spaces, and placemaking, and learn lessons from his projects as well.
Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm Asban Sari, the founder of the organization Peacemakers Pakistani, and I'm bringing you the stories of placemakers, artists, and professionals from around the globe about how they created an impact and made change happen. You are listening to the Making It Happen show. Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the episode. Hello, David. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you and how's life going?
Fantastic, and it's great to be here.
I'm so happy that we are doing it, and I'm happy and honored to have you here, like the opportunity to talk to you. I'm looking forward to learning from you and to get your energy and to be motivated by it. So thank you so much for joining me. Let's start with the first question that I ask everyone because I love to know, how did you find your passion for public spaces and placemaking?
Okay, so back in 1987, the highway department decided to widen a road through our neighbourhood. I went to a public meeting to discuss that, and I became part of a community group fighting the road widening. And as part of that whole process, I started interviewing elderly people about how the neighbourhood used to work, and I became fascinated by how the design of public spaces impacts on the quality of community life. So I wrote a little book about that, which ended up being used as a text in university courses, which was kind of like right back to first principles of why do we make cities, how do they work, etc. And then for a long time, my area, because I have no background in design, I don't have any professional qualifications at all. Because of that, my initial work was in the area of community consultation, community engagement, where I was the go-between between communities and government. And after doing that for a while, I kind of realized that a lot of the planners and designers that I was doing the community consultation work for didn't really know what they were talking about. So I ended up moving into that area myself. So for a while I was doing town centre plans. I employed a urban designer, and then after a while of doing that, I could see that there was some fundamental flaws in all of that process, in that, 99% of what we were recommending to local government was never happening. So I said to my partner, you keep doing these town centre plans and the big picture planning. I'm only going to be interested in getting my hands dirty and actually making some stuff happen on the ground. So that's the snapshot of my journey.
Yes, and I got to know you through your TED Talk, and it was such a lovely way of you introducing yourself and your projects, and the way you put that chair in different streets and you interacted with people. It was so inspiring, and it was such a bold step. So how did that idea come to you? And just a little bit about it. I will also leave the link in the description box for the audience to watch it. But just a little flashback to that.
Yes. So, so part of my history, because of the road widening battle, the first area that I wrote about was traffic calming, which eventually came to mean speed bumps and chicanes and physical changes to the street, although I had a much larger vision of it. But in my early career, yes, I was totally sold on that you had to change the physical design of streets in order to bring the traffic speed down. To cut a very long story short, we were doing a traffic calming scheme for a street here in Brisbane, and we held a street party. And after the street party, the participants, a couple of weeks later, the participants told me that the traffic was going slower in their street since the street party. And I said, well, it can't be because we haven't done anything physical to the street. We've had a street party and that's it. And what I discovered was that as a result of the street party, the amount of street life in that street had increased because we had let people experience the street as a place for socialising, for kids to play, etc. So the amount of social activity in the street had gone up. And I had an aha moment, which was that the speed of traffic on a residential street is governed by the degree to which the residents have psychologically retreated from their street. So if you think historically, what happened was when children used to play in the middle of the street, cars automatically went slow. And then some parents said to their kid, oh, look, it's too dangerous to be playing in the street, play on the footpath or the sidewalk instead. And they didn't realise that they were actually inviting the traffic to go faster by taking their kids off the roadway and having them play on the footpath. And then when the speed of the traffic went up, the parents then went, well, it's too dangerous to be on the footpath, play in the yard or down at the local park. And what I documented was that, people stopped gardening in their front gardens, they put up high fences, etc., etc. So what happened was I started to do a series of experiments, mainly in North America, where I would go into a neighbourhood that had a speeding traffic problem. And I would read how the residents had psychologically retreated. So, for example, if nobody was parking their car in the street, I would say, why is nobody parking their car in the street? Well, the traffic's going too fast. Well, it's going too fast because you don't park your car in the street. Go home and get your cars, bring them out, park them in the street. And we would put the psychological retreat into reverse, but do it in about a 2-hour period. And by the end of that 2 hours, we would have kids doing chalk drawings in the middle of the street quite safely, kids playing in the street, etc. And we did one of these in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles Times sent out a photographer, and he got me to sit in the middle of the 6-lane arterial freeway on a kitchen chair. And it was a photograph I absolutely treasured. So I then wrote a book called Street Reclaiming, which was all about how you reverse the psychological retreat. And the publishers said, look, we're going to send you on a publicity tour. And I said, well, don't really just want to go and hold public meetings. And I remembered this photograph that the paper had published. And I said, why don't I take a chair around the world and just sit in the middle of streets and to publicise the book. And then when I started looking at what kind of chair I was going to create, my creativity ran away with itself. And in the end, I made this very elaborate throne that the whole suitcase actually transforms from a suitcase into a throne. And that's the pictures that you see in the video that it went around the world a couple of times. And in places, and what is extraordinary about that whole experience, and particularly the story that I tell in the TED talk about the homeless lady, is the power of just something even temporary in a public space. So in that case, it was the throne in the middle of deserted car park with weeds growing up through the asphalt, deserted buildings all around. And for one brief moment of time, I made the homeless people who sat on that chair feel at home. And to me, that was the essence of placemaking. It's how do you give people that feeling of belonging, that feeling of importance. And so much placemaking these days is what I call design centric. So it's design professionals going, we're just adding placemaking to the list of things that we do, but they still take a design first approach to placemaking. Whereas I argue that placemaking is first and foremost a psychological task. It's about how do you make people feel like they belong? How do you make people feel like they're connected to a space? And, you know, design. So the design of my chair was important, but that's a means to the end, which is, you know, I say, design is the carriage at the back of the train. It is never the engine driving the train. So the psychological task and also the citizenship task, where we make people feel like they're back in control of their environments again, that they're acting as citizens rather than as passive customers. And that's one of the huge problems of placemaking currently, is that it fits into the existing, what I call the customer model, where people say, I pay my rates, my taxes. I want you, the city or the municipal authority, to give me the sense of community and neighbourhood that I hanker for. And I argue that that's an impossible task. You cannot create that for people as if it was a product that rolls off the end of a production line. And unfortunately, a lot of placemaking treats placemaking like a product that you can design, whereas I say it's both a psychological and a citizenship task, first and foremost, and your design is just a means to that particular end.
Yes, placemaking is the process of doing things, and by the end of it, whatever comes up, that comes up, and that people own because they have created it through the process, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we go back in time, the way that villages across the world worked, and the whole concept of a village or a town or a settlement was that every person in that settlement gave their gifts to the community, whether that was leadership, whether that was empathy, whether that was a physical skill, like being able to make something. Everybody put in something into this magic collective enterprise, and everybody got to take out of that more than what they put in. And that was the magic of what towns and communities were about. And so the whole notion of citizenship is acting as a citizen. I give and I get back more than what I actually give. Now, what has happened over time is that we have moved away from that citizen model to the customer model. And I call a lot of what people are asking their municipal councils to do outsourcing their civic responsibility. So instead of me giving my gift, I say, I'll give you some money and you make that gift that I used to give magically appear. And I say, well, that's never ever going to happen. And in a sense, placemaking in many, many quarters, what flies under the banner of placemaking is part of the customer model, where we're trying to give people back something they used to provide for themselves as a collective. And so for me, the only meaningful placemaking is when we empower residents and people to take on that mantle of responsibility, of citizen responsibility that they used to have. And unless you're doing that, you are still fitting into this placemaking as a product that we can manufacture on fit for your benefit.
Yes, and I agree with that because I have had to unlearn a lot of my professional lessons because I'm an architect. Uh, I have graduated as an architect, but while learning and implementing the placemaking methodologies, the true essence of it that people created themselves, I had to unlearn a lot of things, and it was also the urge to design something for people that they can do it for themselves. So
Yes. Yeah.
it has been a journey till now.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I just love the idea of you publicizing your book through such a creative idea. And that's and all of your work that I was seeing, it has some level of creativity, which was actually very true to you and very unique in its essence. So I want to discuss all of those. I've written them down. So first, let's talk about the New Wings book. I love the title. It's creative as
Yes.
well. So what is it about? And when was
Okay,
it
so
published?
yeah, the story behind that was, I don't know, over 20 odd years ago, there was a Scottish politician who was a really big fan of the books that I'd written. And so he invited me to come and have dinner with his senior bureaucrats. And during this dinner, he kept asking me for the secret of my creativity, and I was a bit blown away. I was like, "What do you mean? Do you think I'm creative?" And he's going, "Oh yeah, hell yeah!" And then he said, "Could you teach my bureaucrats to think like you think?" And I said, "Well, I haven't got the foggiest idea how I think. So how could I teach them how I think?" Anyway, he invited me to travel with him for a week through Europe. And on that trip, I discovered he was a great student of creativity, which is why he was asking me for the secret of my creativity. And he kept asking me questions like, are you a convergent or a divergent thinker? And I'm just going, look, I do not have the foggiest idea. And but it posed a question in my brain, which when I came back to Australia, I was actually doing some study, and I thought, now that's an interesting research question, is what is the nature of creativity? What is it about the way that I think that people judge me to be creative? And I started reading a lot of the books that he talked about, etc., and researching. And one day I had this, I should say, when he asked me that question, I had a nagging thought in the back of my head, which was that my creativity had something to do with my childhood, which was deeply, deeply dysfunctional. I was moved from school to school. I was beat up every single day by the school bullies, and I just couldn't get this thought out of my head that my creativity had something to do with all of those negative experiences that I'd had as a child. And so I just to fill in there, my dad was an itinerant gospel preacher. So we went from town to town, and he would stand on street corners and preach. And that's the reason why I was the target of the school bullies. So what I realized when I started to think about what is creativity in the human brain, I thought, well, the creativity in the human brain is an extension of creativity in nature. Nature somehow has evolved the human brain through a process. And what are the environmental conditions that lead to creativity in nature being maximized? And I surmised that it was probably the same conditions that would maximize creativity in the human brain. And so what I discovered was that there are all these environmental factors that maximize creativity in nature. Now, one of those is the power of the marginal territory. In other words, the most productive regions in nature where spaces overlap. So the overlapping, so the tidal mudflat is a classic example. It's neither sea nor land, it's where it's both. And I thought, that's interesting. So, my childhood experiences were the tidal mudflat. So I was caught between this fundamentalist religion that my parents were part of, the secular world in the school. For example, I had to take notes to school forbidding me for folk dancing. And so I was part of the school system, but I wasn't part of it. So I was caught in that no man's land between the two worlds. And so what I was able to then discern is, why is it that when a baby is first born, it is at its maximum creative abilities? We never think about this, that within a year, that child with no structure whatsoever learns a whole new language, right? And they got no reference points to reference that to. So children's creativity is absolute maximum the day that they're born, and for most people it then diminishes during their lifetime because the environmental conditions are slowly released. So in the book, what I go into is, what are the cultural belief systems, what happens in our education, etc., which starts to stifle our instinctive, natural creativity. So my theories of creativity are very different than 99% of the books out there that try and teach you how to be creative. I argue you are already creative. The problem is you have restrictions on that creativity. And Your New Wings is all about, how do I get rid of, or how do I diminish those restrictions that I've allowed or have been imposed on me over time.
Nice. I'm very much interested in reading this book now. Okay, we'll do so. We'll do so. Okay. By the way, you have answered. I wanted to ask you that what do you think that what holds back people from their creativity? And you have answered this that you have actually written a book on it. That's
Yes, yes,
amazing. Lovely.
yes, yes.
Okay, so we'll discuss
Can
the.
I just say one other thing about that, and what I unpack in the book is how we as a society, we jump from assumed problems to solutions without analysing what the exact problem is. So in the book, I tell a story about the town that fought for 3 years over whether to build a multi-storey car park in their city centre. And where it started was the retailers came to the city and said, we need more parking. And the city went, okay, we'll employ a consultancy firm to go out and see if there is a parking shortage. And the first thing they didn't do was to say to the retailers, but why do you think you need more parking? And whatever answer the retailers gave them, they should have then said, but why do you think that? But why do you think that? Now, what they would have discovered if they had done this is that what the retailers were actually asking for was to get more money flowing through their till. And they jumped from needing more money to the answer was more car parking. They go to the city, and the city simply assumed that the problem as defined by them, which was a lack of parking, was the problem that had to be dealt with, rather than the real problem was, how do we help these retailers get more money flowing through their till? and that's the biggest problem we have in problem solving and in what's stifling creative thinking is that people just go with what's the most creative way to build the car park, and then some architect would get an award for some beautiful car parking structure when that wasn't what the problem was that should have been dealt with. So that's in the book I give, I think it's about 6 thinking techniques which help people get back to how do you think creatively about any kind of presenting problem. One of the other thinking techniques which is incredibly powerful is I talk about the role that the court jester used to play in the courts. So the role of the court jester is to disrupt what is perceived wisdom, because another axiom of creativity is that whatever you create today as a solution to something will become tomorrow's problem. Nothing's static, everything works in cycles, okay? And so what happens is people can be incredibly creative today, create something very creative for tomorrow, but then what they've created then becomes the problem tomorrow. And then they stick with that and they defend it. And I can tell you personally, I've invented things where I've then become the biggest critic of my own inventions because I understand the cyclic nature of creativity. In nature cycles between creating life and things dying. And so that's a natural part of the creative process. Sorry, I'm off on a tangent.
That's such a wise lesson at the end of it, I would say, because that's true that we create something, we enjoy it, and then we let go of it, then we create something new.
Yes.
It's the process, and that's true that life goes on, new problems arise, we try to solve them. It's not just one thing that it's done, completed, and you take it for the rest of your life. That's not possible, and that's true.
Yeah.
Yep, great lesson.
I'll give you a classic example in case people are struggling with understanding the way this works. So in my second book, I proposed a thing called the walking school bus, which was a way of getting kids to schools safely through walking. That took off all over the world. There were millions of kids on walking school buses across the world. Now, my intention in inventing the walking school bus was to give kids independent mobility. I just didn't want them being able to walk to school. I wanted them to be able to walk to their friend's place, to go to the corner store, to go and play in the forest, whatever. And what happened was that when governments started to endorse the walking school bus as an official program, they started to put all kinds of conditions on how the walking school bus was to operate to mitigate risks and all of that. So long story short, what ended up happening with a lot of walking school buses was, first of all, kids had to wear safety vests. They had to walk hand in hand. They weren't allowed to stop along the way. So they didn't enjoy the way we used to walk to school, which was to stop off at the tree and pick the fruit and explore the haunted house and all of those kinds of things. But the other thing that started to happen was that the walking school buses were funded on the basis of how many kids they had on walking school buses. So then the organisers had an incentive to take kids who already had independent mobility, that were walking on their own, and get them onto the walking school bus because that would increase their funding. So we had actually a loss of independent mobility. So the solution that I had created for the first few years worked fine, but then it became its own problem. And I was rolling up at conferences going, it's time to abandon the walking school bus. And everybody's throwing rocks at me because how dare you when, this is a multi-million-dollar business now, where, governments are putting millions of dollars into these walking school buses. So that's a great example of how, yesterday's creativity becomes today's problem. And you have to be agile at all points to know when it's tipped over. Now, and another example of that is placemaking. There's lots of people been out there advocating for placemaking. I think it's at the tipping point right now where it will become its own problem, in the sense of it has become subsumed into a design-centric way of doing things, and it's lost its original psychological and citizenship initiatives that it had. So, I with a number of the leaders in the placemaking field around the world, we are right now having discussions about, is it actually time to ditch the term because it's become so compromised?
Yes, and I would like to follow along that, how it goes. And I can understand what you're trying to say, because we face the problem here as well because of the mindset of the professionals, I guess. It's a game of mindset. It's about the mindset, that how you
Yeah.
approach it and how you use a term and maybe exploit it somehow. Okay, so I wanted to ask you about the walking school bus project, and I'm glad that you talked about it. You mentioned it yourself. So it's not working now. Is that true?
Uh, at a certain level, it is working, but I've over the years, I've experimented with some other approaches, and none of them have reached the level of popularity of that. There's a program that was developed in Germany, which was an adaptation of a program called Traffic Tamers, which was a children's driven program. And a teacher there took that and she refined it and added some of her own innovations. And it is an absolutely brilliant approach. They have something like 80 to 90% of all kids walking to school, even when in the snow. And it's an entirely child-driven program. It costs €1 a year per child to run it, so it's virtually cost-free. And it takes 1 or 2 minutes a day to run it. So, and I won't explain the whole program, but I think that, so in Australia, we ran a couple of trials. We renamed that as Free Range Kids. So probably later this year, I will launch. I'm going through all the things I've created over the years, and I'm putting them into the public domain, and in a way that cities can take the programs and run themselves. So, for example, the 7-day makeover that we do of town centres, which requires us bringing a team of 5 or 6 people into town, a big budget, etc. I want to develop that to the point where a city council can run that themselves without us having to bring a team to town, because at the moment, if we're doing it that way, we can do for a year. Whereas if we can get it into a system or a program that any municipal council can use, then the sky's the limit. We could have 100,000 of them running at any one time. So yes, so that's my vision for. It's like, because I'm in the latter years of my life now, it's like going back. I'm also now back working on that first thing that I talked to you about, where I went around the world doing instant street reclaiming, to the whole psychological retreat. Again, I want to produce a program that helps people in neighbourhoods deal with the traffic problem in their street without having to go to their city council and go, please come and put speed bumps or chicanes in my street. So it's like at the moment I'm getting dragged back to all of those things I did, like in the last century, and saying, look, how do I put that in a form that is usable for other people?
Awesome. And there is no stopping for you. You are not going to stop. You're going to keep creating and keep learning. That's lovely. Very
Yes.
inspiring. Very inspiring. Okay, so what I have learned from you so far is that you actually focus on the problem and then you find the solutions. That's why it comes up very creative projects. For example, um, you wanted children to be independent as they walk around the town and to the places they want to be. That's why you created the walking school bus project, and the other ones you're talking about, the free range children project.
Yes.
So basically, you have always identified the problem first, and then you figure out the solutions for it. And that's the best,
Correct.
definitely. So,
Just on that,
yes,
so Einstein said if he had an hour to solve a problem and his life depended on the outcome, he would spend the first 50 minutes cross-examining what the problem to be solved is, because once he understood the nature of the problem, he would find the solution in 10 minutes. And we reverse that. I mean, we don't spend any time trying to define digging into what is the actual problem we're trying to solve. So, yeah.
that's true. That I have learned it myself as well, so I can agree to that. And it, now the next step that I'm on is that personally, what like we face challenges in empowering the community in empowering the communities to take the civic responsibility because yes, we have realized it. How do you inspire people to realize it themselves? And what challenges do you face and what were the lessons through it?
Okay, so it's a very good question. So first up, most people give their power away. Let me go back one step. So a big issue in what I've called the customer model is that we have, say, a local authority will invite the community to come to a meeting to give their ideas for changes to their town centre, for argument's sake. They've probably employed a consultant to run that process for them. Now, certainly in Australia, North America, I don't know Pakistan well enough to know whether it's the same there, but what happens here is we have all these studies commissioned for town centres, for community development plans, for economic development plans, for cycling plans, walking plans, whatever. But when the money is put in the budget for that study, there is no money put in the budget for implementation of what the study finds. So that's like employing an architect to design you a house. And when you say to me, well, David, how much money have you got to build your house? And I go, oh, I don't know, just bring me your best plan and, I'll see what I can do. In the real world, it doesn't work that way. But in government, it works that way where, and so what then happens is when you sit down with the community and go, what do you want for your town centre or your neighbourhood or your bikeways or whatever it is that you're studying, because there's no budget allocated for implementation, the consultant doesn't say, look, by the way, we've only got $5,000 to spend on this solution. They just go, what do you want? Right? And so the community generates what I call the unaffordable wish list. We may as well have everything gold plated. Come on. And then we give people red dots to go and vote for their favorite wish. And it's like the wish with the most red dots is obviously going to just magically materialize because everybody wants that one. So to me, that is a huge challenge. And it was the turning point in my career when I discovered that, because I stopped doing studies for local government unless there was an implementation budget in place. And that's eventually what the 7-day makeover grew out of, was us saying we have to have a pot of money, otherwise we're not sitting down with the community to ask them what they want. And so the first thing that has to happen is that discussions with the community have to be grounded in reality. And the first reality is, what are the resources we've got to work with? So when we're doing 7-day makeovers, the first thing one of the first things we do is we set up what we call the resources bank. Into that goes the budget that we've got from local government. We also do crowdfunding, we do sponsorships. We also go to the local council depot and say, what junk have you got laying around the depot could we have? And we take photos of it. And all of that goes into our resources bank. Now, my job in working with the community is to trigger their creativity as to what's the most creative use for that $60,000, the old bridge, the refrigerator, whatever it is that we've got access to. So your engagement with communities must be based in the resources that you've got access to, not what you wish you had or some nebulous, one day the money might be there. The second thing is that so my model of community engagement is what I call informed community doing, which is different to community engagement or community consultation. So the first part of that is the quality of what communities will do depends entirely on the quality of their insights, of the information. So I've seen a lot of communities expend a lot of energy doing things in their town centre, for example, which from a placemaking perspective, I know is totally ineffective because they don't have the insights to know that that's going to be ineffective. They don't have the insights to know what makes their town centre work or not work. So for us in a 7-day makeover, the first thing we do is share with them the placemaking secrets that are relevant to their makeover space or their town centre. We then take them for a walk through their town centre and we point out what's working, what's not working, why it's not working, etc. We also, there's a whole other aspect I'll talk about in a minute, you've got to have a field of play. You've got to know what you're allowed to do, not allowed to do. And we explain that to them on the walk so they have quality information to generate their ideas from. So now they've got a resources bank. They've got quality information. So now they can generate quality ideas for how they use that money, but based on the information that they've been given. Now, the next part of the equation is that where community engagement goes wrong is that it's all talk-based and it's all hypothetical. Which of these wishes do you like the most? Whereas what we do is we test what is the community actually willing to put their blood, sweat and tears into, because that's the only thing that's viable. Everything else is hot air and talk. So that's informed community doing. So the decisions are based on what the community is willing to do. We have a very, very simple technique for that. After we've helped the community generate maximum ideas based on the quality information, on the resources that they have, we go and we create a hothouse of creativity. So we're constantly going, what if? Yes, that's a great idea, but what ideas does that trigger for you? And so there's just ideas firing left, right, centre. And I then say to the group, if you had 10 minutes to invest in your town centre or the makeover space, what idea did you hear today would you give your 10 minutes to? So we're testing where is the energy to make something happen. And then we say, if you're so excited by that idea, you want to be one of the organisers that help make that idea happen. Come out the front, write it on a sheet of paper, and everybody that supports that would give their 10 minutes to that idea, go and stand with that person. And they are our preliminary project groups. It is not me, the placemaker, that goes, well, that idea works with that idea, works with that idea. It's all based on where is the energy in the community. So I think it's a long answer to your question, but it outlines. Now, the other key thing that has to happen, which is a creation of ours, is what we call moving from a regulatory approach to a permissions approach. So we can't do a 7-day makeover of a town centre under a regulatory process. We can't go set up project groups and then go, well, that means that would need a building permit. You know, we'd be tied up in red tape for the next 2 years. So we sit down with the senior management of the council prior to the makeover, and we give them a pro forma, we call it the What is Allowed agreement, which is a single A4 sheet of paper. And it has permission statements on it. So a typical permission statement is you can do whatever you like on the footpath or the sidewalk, as long as you leave a continuous walkway width of 1.8 metres. Now, normally that would involve dozens and dozens of regulations, but the intent of all of those regulations is to have a walkway that people can walk down that's not got things that people trip over, right? Another permission statement is if it's movable, it's allowable. We say, why do you need a building permit if the thing is movable? Right. So that then means that modifies the way people make stuff, is they make everything movable. Because then we say, look, city authority, if you don't like the design of it, if you don't like where it is, if you don't think it's safe, it's movable. You know, we haven't concreted it in place. So that's an example. So what we're doing is creating a field of play that we can say to the residents, the ideas that you generate must fit within this field of play. And here's a classic example of the power of permission statements, but also understanding, creative problem solving processes. So what we also do is we do an audit of the space that's to be made over beforehand. And so a real world example, in one town there was a yellow fence that ran for an entire block of the town centre because the sidewalk or the footpath had 2 levels in it, and the yellow fence was on the top level to stop people falling over the ledge. Now, psychologically, a yellow safety fence tells everybody to stay away. It's dangerous, right? So the poor businesses behind this fence are suffering economically because of the fence. Now, so I go into the What is Allowed meeting with the council, and I knew the history of this. The community had been arguing for 25 years for this fence to be taken away. And the council always said, no, it can't. So I said, in the negotiations for the What is Allowed, I said, can we take away the yellow fence? No, you can't. I said, well, what's the problem it's trying to solve? Well, we need to stop people falling off of that ledge. I said, you mean we've got a room full of 20 really intelligent people in this room, and none of you can think of any other way to stop people falling off of ledges other than a yellow fence? And they all laughed, they started going, oh, yeah, I guess planter boxes or... Absolutely. There are so many things that would add life to the street rather than taking life away that would accomplish what your end goal was, which was to stop people falling off this ledge. So in the permission statement, it then just read, the yellow fence can be removed as long as it's replaced with something that stops people falling off the ledge. And so you're then handing responsibility over to the community to come up with a creative solution that adds life to the space rather than taking life away. So that's the power of permission statements that get to the heart of what is the actual problem we're trying to solve. Now, as the local authority, let's stop imposing one single solution to that. You know, another classic example is bollards. I hate bollards. And I always say to the council, but what are the bollards there for? Well, they're to stop trucks running into the awning. You mean you can't think of anything positive that would stop trucks running into awnings that would add life to the street rather than taking life away? So it's always back to, you know, what is the purpose? Okay, let the community come up with the solution to that. Now, I don't know what question I was supposed to be answering.
That's actually that's a strong way to empower communities, to engage them, because you are posing them the question or the problem statement that you're trying to solve. And in that process, people actually learn that why we need to do something, and they get
Yeah.
the awareness in the process as well. So that's a strong way of doing it and the right way
All
of
right. I remember your original question. I remember what I was going to say. And that's about how do we get community people involved. So what I've outlined throughout our chat is that the processes that local government uses disempowers the community and treats them as customers rather than as citizens. And that's a vicious cycle then. Now, the way to empower communities, and I've outlined, like, if you're doing like a town centre maker, that there's a prior thing we need to explain about this. The first is that most people give their power away by believing that somebody else needs to take an action to solve the problem for them. And the most empowering thing we can do for people is to show them ways that they can solve the problem themselves with the resources that they already have. And they can do it right now, right here, or they can at least start the process. So if I go right back to where we started with explaining how we lost our streets to traffic, how, you know, the first parent says, don't play in the middle of the street, play on the sidewalk, play in the front yard. So simple things that people can do to start taking their street back as social space and therefore dealing with the traffic problem is, instead of reading a book at the back of their house, you know, on a kitchen, out in the sun on a kitchen chair, take the chair out onto the footpath and read the book sitting on the footpath. Instead of taking your child to the park to play, supervise your child playing on the footpath or the sidewalk. So everybody has, you know, simply leave a seat on the footpath outside of your house. Encourages social life. So every single person has just smiling at people when you're walking down the street is an act of placemaking. It's making people feel at home. It's making people feel comfortable. So citizenship is about, what do I have the power to give that is transformative? And I tell the story to illustrate this, that you know, I mentioned how I was brought up in a very fundamentalist religion. And when I was first kind of coming out of that, and I was still very ultra conservative, I was in London sitting in a cafe, and across the room was this elderly lady that had bright red hair. And I said to my traveling companion, I wish I had the guts to do something like that. And I came back to Australia and I couldn't get this lady out of my head. And that statement I'd made, I wish I had the guts to do something like that. Long story, it took me about 6 months to gain the courage, but I went and got my hair dyed purple. And everywhere I went, people were stopping me in the street saying, oh, I wish I had the guts to do something like that. Now, as a result of dyeing my hair purple, my creativity just went through the roof. Now, that woman just sitting there drinking a cup of coffee with her red hair didn't know she was giving me that gift that I then brought back to Australia, that I then gave to other people. That is the ultimate in placemaking, is where people just, as part of their everyday life, are enriching the experience of other people within the public realm. And we've got to get people back to that understanding of that is really what placemaking is all about. That's what citizenship is all about. And we all have the power to do that. From my own personal experience, I have a bike track on 3 sides of my property. The local authority resumed part of my property to turn it into a bike track, and I have a bike track on 3 sides. So I see that as a gift that the universe has dropped into my lap, that I happen to own a house that has a bike track on 3 sides. So the question is, what can I do, having been given that, to enrich my community? I've turned my entire yard into a public park, and it is constantly full of kids and people. And as a result, I've changed the whole dynamics of my neighborhood. So everybody has resources, gifts, things that they're good at. And the question becomes, what can I do today with what I already have to make a difference in this world? And that's how we empower people. The other thing that is a huge issue in our society is, and I unpack this in the Your New Wings book, is that we are a future, as a culture, we believe that our potential always lies over the horizon at some future destination. So as individuals, people say, I will fly when I get my architect's degree. I will fly when I find the perfect partner. I will fly when I get rid of the person I thought was the perfect partner. You know, I will fly when I get the job promotion. And cities invest, I don't know, at least 95% of their energy creating plans for 10, 15, 20 years' time. Now, the potential of the city always resides at some future time frame. The only problem is we never ever arrive. Or when we arrive, it's very disappointing. Or it doesn't give us what we thought it was going to give us. The people who make a difference in this world are the people who say, what have I got today? Well, I'll put it another way. So in the book, I say the key question is, how do I live today like I want to live tomorrow? How do I drag tomorrow into the present moment? What are the assets that I've got? And I always remember that I had this dream of creating great public art. And I was spending time going out looking at old disused warehouses and factories and stuff as places that I could set. I called it the creativity factory, where I could set up this creativity factory. And one day I realized that I had a little bit of space under my house that I wasn't using. And I said to myself, why do you deserve a creativity factory when you're not using that space? So I went out and I employed a sculptor to come in and teach me how to sculpt in that space. That eventually led to my whole yard becoming a community park. It eventually led to the amazing things that we do on 7-day makeovers, where the whole world has become my creativity factory. But it had to start by saying, what have I already got that I'm not using, and why am I off dreaming about what I can create? So I think that, to me, if we can get that message across to people and help people make that transition from giving their power away to either, my potential lies further down the track, or my potential lies in the hands of, the planning department at City Hall, or, big business or somebody else. It's what's the contribution I can make with the resources I already have?
Best answer. So, it covered all ranges, and was, it actually makes other think, and it makes me think as well as a leader. So thank you so much. And I had a problem statement as well, and I wanted to ask you to tell me any creative approach to that you might have to answer it. But I think you cover it in it, because it is like that. Like I said, that your answer was inspiring thought process in me, and I was able to answer the problem statement myself. Like, I wanted to ask you that, uh, how can we inspire people to take action and to improve the antisocial behavior of people in public spaces, because most of the times we don't go out in public spaces because of the immoral behaviors, to be precise, especially women. They don't go outside because of some problems. But like you mentioned, that if people activate their own zones, or their own on spaces that are shared, like the private public spaces, like the porch you mentioned, it can
Yeah,
reduce, it can be it can work as an eyes on the street, and it can prevent something wrong from happening, especially to children or to other people. So what I'm trying to say is, like, inspiring people to take positive actions to minimize the problems they are facing, instead of retreating and holding back, which creates an actual psychological barrier to others as well,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So what's really important to understand about this is that in nature, uh, disease or problems start at the micro level, and there's a chain reaction that is set up, a negative cycle. In the same way, those ecosystems become healthy by, at the micro level. The problem in our planning and in our society is that we believe that big problems require big interventions. And so we start looking for what is the big intervention, rather than what is the micro thing that we can do that has the possibility of beginning to snowball. And you gave a good example of, if you're in a neighborhood where women don't feel safe going out at night time, that is the end result of a long chain reaction, or a series of vicious cycles, where the fact that it's like when I'm asked to look at a public space that has been taken over by youth gangs or homeless people or some so-called antisocial thing. I always say to those people, because what they're dealing with is, how do we deal with these youth gangs? How do we deal with these homeless people? And I say, they're not the problem. The problem is all of the people who've given up on the space and don't go there anymore. If you had them back in the space, these people can be there and they're not a problem, because there's enough, positive social activity happening in the space that those people can still be there. They just don't cause an issue. And so when you look at that, the issue that you cited of the safety of women in neighborhoods and feeling unsafe, you have to find ways of what's the small things that we can do that start a positive cycle in that? And you are not going to get tipping the balance where it is just safe for women to go out at any time in the night. That's not going to happen on day one. But you can take an action. So, and my challenge to you, to every single person, say if that happens to be the issue that you're passionate about, what is the small thing that you can do that potentially starts up the positive cycle? Now, that might be that if you've got a porch, that you take a lantern out and sit on your porch for 2 hours a night, and but you let all the other women in your neighbourhood know that you're doing that as the start of. Now, I'm not being prescriptive. I'm using this as an example of how you find the initiative that has the potential to begin to snowball, even though it seems very, very insignificant in that first instance. And that's the other thing I would say to leaders. I am a great believer that, and I have been all my life. So for years, I was what I would call a theoretician. I wrote books about how public spaces worked. I travelled around the world. I ran training workshops for planning professionals. I did 3-day intensives on placemaking for design professionals, etc., etc. And at the end of the day, it came down to, but David, what are you actually doing besides talking to create a better world, right? Because all you're doing is giving other people information and hoping that they do it. Unless you're doing it yourself, then, I have lots of great friends who are still doing the same as what I used to do, traveling around the world, talking about placemaking, holding workshops, etc. For me, spending, at least 20% of my time down in the park building the next thing for kids, I don't believe that I'm making the impact in the world that I need to be making in the world. And I don't really have the right to go out and tell other people what to do if I'm not doing it myself.
Yes, I agree, because if it's exactly the same thing for me. Like, if I'm not doing something, then I don't think so that it's going to make an impact, and it's not placemaking, because it's an act of doing things. It's making. I agree to that. And okay,
Absolutely.
you mentioned one thing that clicked to me is, we don't the personal problems, the personal things that we are facing, we don't talk about it, especially I think so in a positive manner. Like you said, that if you're doing something, trying to do something in your neighborhood, as you're experiencing as a woman, you talk to other women, they join you in it, and that can create a synergy. And that's true, because we don't often talk about the problem in a manner with a solution sometimes, unless we want to
Yeah.
make a big campaign out of it or something. But for small changes, we should talk more about it, and people will join in at the end.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Look, something very, very important about what you just said. So one of the things I'm very strong about in my new book, The Revitalising Our Town Centres, is that it is the stories that communities tell themselves that put a glass ceiling on what is possible for that community. And in placemaking, one of the key tasks in placemaking is about understanding what are the stories. So in your instance, it is quite reasonable that your neighbourhood is saying it is unsafe for women to walk on their own at night. But that story, the story itself, is putting a glass ceiling on what's possible for your community, right? Now, And placemaking, the number one task in placemaking is about changing and challenging those stories. Because unless you change those stories, anything you do in the physical realm is not going to make an ounce of difference, because it's the story that's setting the ceiling on what's possible. So I can give examples. In the first town that I was a placemaker in, called itself Struggle Town. And the problem is that the town's stories become manifested in the physical space. So your story that women aren't safe at night time will manifest itself in the way that physical space is arranged. Right? As somebody once said, we make our cities and then our cities make us. Well, our stories tell us how to make our cities, and how we make our cities reinforces our stories. And I'll tell you a real instance that happened with me that shows how it's the micro decisions that can start to shift those stories. So when I built the park, the first thing I built was a big deck under this big tree down the backyard. And I went out and I bought $2,000 worth of quite expensive furniture. And my daughter said to me, "Dad, you better bolt that down." And I said, "Well, I can't, because I don't believe in bolting. Because the act of bolting it down would tell my community I don't trust them." This is where the micro reinforces stories, right? So I left it loose there, and one night there's a lady sitting out there and she says, "You know that you've started a big debate in the community." And I said, "What's that?" She said, "Well, 50% of us think this furniture is going to get stolen and 50% of us don't." And I thought it was worth $2,000 to start that discussion, to bring that story out of the dark into the light, and for people to say, are we really a community of thieves and robbers, or are we a trustworthy community? So I'm starting, the act of putting the loose furniture there started to shift the story. Now, because the furniture is still there 5 years later, the story is significantly shifted. So that the power of stories and the power of small actions to start changing those stories. And that's why I really, yes, I do encourage you that for example, if you were to do something, take an action like that, go and talk to other people about it. So the story company is out in the open, that you're openly, discussing it and going, how do we actually change that story?
Best. And I'm going to work on it and I will share it with you.
Let me know.
Yeah.
Let me know.
Okay. So, sir, we have discussed things so far, and we see that there's always a process and the trust building takes time. Uh, One of your project that's name is 7 day makeover. If
Yeah.
someone who is not familiar with the story and the way it happens might take it as a kickstart of making over a place in 7 day without any story to it. But what I have seen so far, or what I have learned from you, I think that it's not just a 7 day thing. It must have a story building, or a community that's has discussed things, and then the implementation process is the 7 day makeover. Is that true? Like, this is how I'm getting it, because a lot of people can take a wrong way of doing things, and they do. I have seen them doing it. So it's like, how is the process of it entirely? Is it really 7 day thing, like from scratch to this, the top, like community engagement? What steps does it takes?
Okay, so it is. So there's obviously some lead in. So there are things like, so I come to town 4 weeks before the 7 day makeover. We hold a public information night. so people know what's going to be happening. We do a whole lot of social media marketing. We have a meeting with the council to decide that what is allowed, document, can we take the yellow fence down, etc. So that all happens 4 weeks prior to the 7-day makeover. Then on the 7-day makeover, on day so the first 2 days are a workshop, and then it's followed immediately with 5 days of making. The 2-day workshop, day one, is we give them that quality information that I talked about. We take them for a walk through their town centre. We get them to generate the maximum number of ideas using the resources in the resources bank. We ask them what they'd put their 10 minutes into, and then they get into project teams. So that's the end of day one. So they're in preliminary project teams by the end of day one. Day two, those preliminary project teams have to develop a project plan. So we give them what's called the project whiteboard. They have to work out what materials they need, how much they're going to cost, where they're going to get it from, what volunteers they need, do they need special permission from anybody for anything, etc. What OH&S issues are they going to have to deal with, etc. We then have each of those teams present where they're up to during the day. So we have review points, at which time the entire audience gets to vote on whether a project continues to be developed or it's parked for some future time. Now, it may be parked because it's a stupid idea, or it might get parked because they can't get materials in time or whatever. We then have to get each of the projects to modify to fit within the overall budget. So if we had a budget of $63,000, for example, we would be making a list of all of those projects on a whiteboard with where they're up to on their budget with a running total. And we'd be able to say to the group, look, we're $5,000 over, everybody has to find a way of trimming back, or we have to park one of the projects, So it's just an open discussion about how we're going to make it happen. A really, really, really important part of this is that we make it very clear to the project groups that what they're coming up with on that day is a starting point, not a master plan. So we're not asking them to come up with the final design with the colors and everything. It's where do we start with this project? Because what we've discovered is that during the 5 days of making, all of those projects mature and develop and evolve if people stay open and flexible, and particularly to what other groups are doing. So one of the things people are really worried about is, doesn't this just lead to a hodgepodge of projects that are uncoordinated? Well, no, because it's back to the way towns used to evolve. I mean, everybody used to put their little bit of magic in and somehow the whole thing works, right? So it's an experiment in that kind of citizenship. If everybody puts in, the sum of it is greater than. Now we do things like we will have an artist, the 3 most artistic people in the group choose a color palette, for example, so that there's consistency across the projects. But we also encourage the projects to look at what other projects are doing and adopt the shape or symbols or whatever from other projects into their project. And then the 5 days of making starts. And so incidentally, this used to be a 12-week process where we would do the 2-day workshop. We would get people into the project teams, and then we would give them 12 weeks to organise. And then we would have what in the technical language is called the sprint, which is where you all come together and you make it in a really short period of time. And what we discovered was that communities like local government authorities are addicted to a master planning mentality where you've got to have everything resolved before you can start doing anything. And so we did that 12-week process for probably about 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, we reviewed all of the towns that we'd worked in. And half of them, the projects were stuck in endless committee meetings, people arguing, town naysayers getting motivated and closing projects down. Very, very few of them had actually gone through to fruition, and virtually none of them had happened within the 12 weeks. They'd all blown out, which is when we decided to cut the 12-week bit out, and we would go straight from workshop into making, so nobody had time for a committee meeting. We wanted to give people a real-world experience of what's called agile planning, which is all about what's our starting point, what's our first deliverable. This was first pioneered in software development, but we're basically using the same methodology as what they use in agile software development, agile business development, which is your important thing is where's your starting point, what's your first deliverable. And you're right that what we're trying to do is give the community and the local government an experience of an agile methodology so that they continue to do it. Now, we're not 100% successful in that, but we have in lots of towns left behind a legacy of the community continuing to work in the public space, raise their own funds to do projects, maintaining what they made, etc. Now, that's not in every town that we've been in, but there are some really notable examples of right down to where people have formed not-for-profit organisations to run that entire process. Now, there is a tendency to go back to the more committee meetings and less agile stuff with those groups, and that varies across the different towns as to how much they go back into the kind of master planning mentality. But our goal is to shift people towards that. So what we're doing in our most recent work, so we're working with another big organisation in Australia right now, to bring all of this down to the local level to empower people to be doing this kind of agile thing at their neighbourhood level, on their front porch, in their front yard, out the front of their house, rather than the big grandiose type of projects that we've been doing, the 7-day makeovers. Now, they've been really, really important in improving the methodology, but now we want to take that methodology and bring it down to the more micro level.
Great. Thank you so much for explaining it. And, the whole conversation has been so enlightening and it was like having a class with you. And that class I'm able to share with others as well. So I'm so grateful to you for giving this time to me. And okay, now these were the questions that I asked you particularly. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions that I ask everyone. It's sort of a rapid fire to get to know more you personally. So I would like to know what drives you, what keeps you focused on the work that you do.
I guess what drives me is knowing that I have the capacity to break through people's self-imposed limitations, and whether that's at the individual level or at a community level or a town level. So I think my gift to the wider community is about showing them that they are capable of far more than they imagine they're capable of, but then giving them the tools to be able to do that, to actually reach that potential. Um, so it's, it's back to the story of the red-headed lady. It's about how do you lift the ceiling of what people perceive is possible, um, and yeah, that's really what um, uh, I guess uh, drives me on.
Lovely. Thank you so much for the great work that you do and for having such confidence in yourself and for the willingness to share your gift with the world because it's very inspiring and we need it. We need more of it.
Yeah.
Okay, would you like to share any proudest moment of your work life?
Oh, goodness. Oh, there's so many of them. I certainly think the night that the homeless people sat on my throne in the Los Angeles car park was an absolute highlight. Another highlight was I went to Germany to the school where that teacher refined my very simple walk to school program that requires virtually no money and is organised by the kids themselves. And I was absolutely mobbed by the kids. They just, they so loved the program. So that was a huge highlight. Um, on some of our 7-day makeovers where we've seen like one town in New Zealand, there was a huge opposition to the 7-day makeover. The local newspaper was campaigning against it. The information night, a whole lot of people came out to basically say they didn't want it. And one of the ringleaders of that anti 7-day makeover group became our most passionate volunteer and was there almost 24 hours a day. So, to be able to turn people, somebody like that, from a naysayer into somebody that actually experienced the joy of giving to their town rather than just sitting on the sidelines saying, no, 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 was a huge proud moment. I think my park is probably, some people would say, my greatest accomplishment. It's been featured on national TV here in Australia. Um, it there are just so many stories, like a lady that I was talking to one day, and she was waiting to meet a refugee that she'd met in the park. And she said that the park was the only space that this refugee felt safe to meet her, and that she was going to be, helping this refugee, settling in. Uh, seeing a grandmother, bring scones and little teapots and stuff down and have a little tea party in the park with their grandkids. It's just all those micro things that you just go, wow, like it really does make a difference in people's lives. I had a high school kid who used to call in every afternoon and say hello to me, and it just, all of going to the local supermarket and having kids yell out my name from the other side of the supermarket. It's like, and not that I'm a bit of an introvert and a bit of a hermit. Um, so it's not that I'm doing it to get that kind of recognition, or that semi embarrasses me at one level. Um, but it says you're making a contribution, that you're making a difference. And that's really important.
Such precious moments. Thank you so much for sharing it with me and others. Okay, any hardest moment of your work like that you really struggled with and then came out of it stronger or something like that?
Oh, yes. Uh, how many? Um, the biggest challenge of my life was I was asked to be the placemaker for a country or a rural city a long way from home, and but they asked me to live there. They didn't want me just flying in and giving them advice. And I gave my heart and soul to that project. It was the first time I'd ever worked inside a council organisation. Um, I I absolutely struggled with understanding how the bureaucracy worked or why it didn't work. Um, and in the end, um, I was chased out of town. It was basically there was one political person in town that had a vendetta for me. Actually, they had a vendetta for somebody else, but because I was somebody else's favourite project, I had to go. Um, and that was so bad that I actually handed back $50,000 of my consultancy fee and said I was not taking money under false pretenses that I'd been working. They basically closed me down to the point where I wasn't producing anything worthwhile. So I gave the remainder of my consultancy fee back and left town. I was shattered for a good 6 months, couldn't understand what had happened, what had gone wrong. But it's the foundation of what I can now do. I couldn't do 7-day makeovers without that experience because I understand how bureaucracies work from the inside, right, and what stops them from working. So that taught me so much about what goes wrong or what is wrong with the processes. So that was probably my lowest point. I invested $150,000 in a walk to school program to replace the walking school bus, and the person I employed basically didn't deliver the work I'd employed them to do and shot through with the money. But interestingly, the German walk to school program grew out of the remnants of what I'd developed in that when I'd lost that $150,000. So, I've had a pretty checkered career of putting money into developing projects and them falling over. So, I've lost a shitload of money along the way.
But
But
keep going.
yeah. To learn something from every one of them. So, yeah.
Right, and your hardest moments were basically about the rejection and the betrayal. The emotional wounds were basically the struggling part for you, right? Because it is
Oh,
really that sort of.
absolutely. Because, as I said, I gave my heart and soul. I
Yeah.
mean, I moved from my hometown to live there, and I was staying in a little flat on top of a bakery in the main street. There were some other issues I was dealing with, family issues I was dealing with at the time. And, the majority of the town absolutely loved what we were doing. But then to be sensibly sacked by the council, or put in a position where I couldn't fulfil my duties, I felt totally betrayed. I felt I'd given my heart and my soul, to this process. I remember I didn't leave my desk once for 36 hours straight because I was writing a report, and I just thought it was so important. But yeah, therein lies one of the lessons I learned, that spending 36 hours straight to write a report counted for absolutely nothing at the end of the day. You know, the only good things that happened in that were left in that town was the inspiration that I'd given to retailers and to residents to be prouder of their town. You know, changing the town story to some extent. That was the only legacy I left. So much of what I did was always, was a misinvestment of time.
Yes, and those stories that you left behind are going to create some ripple effect, definitely. For sure it will.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Is there any placemaking mantra that you love to remember whenever you start something? Or any favorite quote of yours that you love to remember while you work?
There's one that some people I'm not sure where it originated. A lot of people say it originated with me, so apparently I said this. But a space does not become a place until it's used for a purpose other than that which the designer intended. And at the heart of what it's about is this emotional connection that people have and so I explain placemaking as being homemaking in the public realm. And we didn't go there in this discussion, but I said basically it's homemaking, but out there in the public space. And a person does not feel at home in your home until they treat your home as if it was their own home, which means they move things, they get up, they take initiatives. They're not paralyzed by, I'm just an observer of things that are going on in this space. So I have lots of pictures of things like, a lady, a piece of exercise equipment, public exercise equipment, with a lady laying on it reading a book. And I go, that's placemaking. She's using it for a purpose other than that which the designer intended. Every time you see people sitting on steps, they're adapting the space for where they feel at home.
Yeah.
Right. So it's an interesting thing that we must design. So I'm a passionate designer. I've kind of bagged design out, but I love great design. And great design is design that gives people permission to adapt whatever it is that you're making for them.
Yeah.
So whenever I design something, so when we do 7-day makeovers, we often will do one central thing that we kind of see as a kind of a legacy project that the whole community can be proud of. And so often I'm deeply involved in the design of that, and often the building of it. But I'm always asking the question, how can I build ambiguity into this design so that it can be used, adapted for multiple purposes that I can't foresee? And that requires simplicity, and it requires ambiguity. Now, what was the question?
Your favorite place making?
The truism, yeah. Look, the other interesting one that I've got a lot of feedback on recently, I just did a post on LinkedIn. So I've developed a whole range of placemaking concepts or terms that people can use. And one of those terms is eddy spaces. Um, Now, when I do an audit of a town centre, particularly in Australia or North America, one of the things people will say is we've got no public space to make over, and by what which they mean there's no town square, there's no central park in the town centre, which is true in many uh, modern cities. Now, what I look for is what I call the eddy spaces. So when you look at a footpath or a sidewalk, where your main pedestrian flow is. There's a clear line with no furniture or anything in it, and then to the sides of that you have trees, telephone booths, rubbish bins, etc. And between those items is the eddy zones. That is the space where people are not walking. It's like, so the analogy is, in a creek you have the main stream and then you have the eddies on the sides. Yet every town is full of hundreds of these eddy spaces, which are the places where you do your placemaking. And they are more valuable than having a town square because people are walking right past them, so you have a greater opportunity for them to be used and add value to the space. The other concept that we use is what we call linger nodes. And so we say that if you can get your people to take 3 times as long to walk down the street as what it currently takes them, then your street will be 3 times as full of people and will be 3 times more attractive for other people to visit. So our number one job is to slow the flow of people through a public space. That's the number one placemaking secret. And to do that, you must have linger nodes. They're the things that actually slow. So in the last makeover we just did, for example, we identified a very large eddy space, and we turned that into a nature play area for kids. And so now every parent walking down the street, the kid has to stop and climb on the rocks and the logs and the dry creek bed and whatever. So we're slowing the flow of the people by putting the linger node in the eddy space. The other key concept, I'll end up going on forever, but the other key concept is don't spread your party too thin. If you understand that density of activity is the secret to a very vibrant public space, then the number one mistake that people make is they try to animate too much space at once. It's like what I call saying, if you've got a party at your house and the party's dead because you haven't got enough people there, the solution is not to move your party to a bigger venue. The solution is to shrink the size of the venue, and then you get the vibe happening. And that's the number one mistake that communities make, that designers make, that cities make. I can't tell you the number of times that we've gone in and just said, you've already spread your party too thin. And what you've got to come back to is, so where are we going to make the party happen? What's the small zone? Or how do we decrease the impressions of just unlimited space? So, one way of doing that is to break the space up into smaller rooms. So you feel much more intimate within each of those rooms rather than one huge room. So there's some of the placemaking techniques or concepts that we think are really, really important.
Great ones. Thank you so much. Okay, do you have any opinion about Pakistan, good or bad, or anything that you would like to know about it? So, I'll take note.
It's one of the places I've never been in the world. I've been to lots of other places, so I know I can't, and I wouldn't dare. If I'd spent time there, maybe I would make some observations. But
I have a list of guests now that I would love to host here because a lot of people have not been here. So
yeah.
it's fun to know. I love this question. Okay. Lastly, is there any advice that you would like to give to the young professional who are joining in? You have shared a lot of things to reflect and to work on, but anything just to sum it up right now?
Absolutely. So I often say that my greatest asset is my lack of education. Because the moment you're educated, which is partly what I unpack in Your New Wings, is you start building walls and silos around your knowledge area. The great writer Lewis Mumford argued that what the world needed was generalists, not specialists. And by that, he meant that when specialists are locked in their silos, um, there is information outside of that silo that makes the belief systems within the silo totally irrational. And so you have to open yourself up to other disciplines, other areas of information to be able to see the blind spots or the irrational beliefs within your profession. So let me give you a very simple example of that when I first started in the transport field. So I went to an international transport engineers conference, and I asked a very simple research question, which is, what is the role of the transport system? Now, something like 97% of participants use the definition like to keep people and traffic moving. Right? So I got up to do my keynote and I said, if your job as a transport engineer is to keep people and freight moving, put a merry-go-round on every street corner and put the people and freight on a merry-go-round and you will have unlimited movement with no congestion. So that shows you how fundamentally flawed the whole profession is based on that underlying assumption that their job is to keep people moving and freight moving. Now, in my second book, I asked myself that question, and I say that the role of a city and the role of a transport system is to maximize the number of exchanges that people get and minimize the amount of travel they have to do to get those exchanges. Now, that totally turns your definition of what a transport engineer is meant to be doing. And what they miss then is that there are two ways that exchanges get transacted in cities. There are planned exchanges. So you and I are having a planned exchange right now. If I go to the dentist, it will be a planned exchange. And then there are spontaneous exchanges. So if you sit on your porch and somebody walks past with their kids and you have a conversation, that's a spontaneous exchange. Now, in the older cities, and I would imagine probably in Pakistan, this is still highly the case. The balance between planned exchanges and spontaneous exchanges is on the side of the spontaneous exchanges. The life of the community revolves more around spontaneous exchanges than planned. In our modern cities, and with traffic engineers taking over, a traffic engineer is only concerned about planned exchanges. I've got to get somebody to their dental appointment. I've got to get somebody to their work. They're not concerned about what are the incidental spontaneous exchanges that are happening along the way. Now, in the traditional city, there might have been 50 spontaneous exchanges for every single trip that somebody made for a planned exchange. So, going to the corner store and along the way, 20 spontaneous exchanges. So that's why it is so important to cross-examine the absolute fundamentals of your profession. What are the assumptions our job is? Because otherwise you could be investing your entire career in counterproductive measures.
Best advice, I would say that. Because that's true. If we are not self-reflecting, we are not going to take the right decision. I believe that because that's how shift happened with me. I'm an architect and then I turned to this side, because I believe that my purpose is to make people find comfort in their places. So, however, it's possible for me to provide them. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Sunil. Thank you so much for your time. It was a valuable talk and it was such an enlightening experience. I loved it. Thank you so much. We'll stay in touch and
Right.
I update with you my stories as well. I would love to do that.
Yes. So yes, if you want to follow up chat at some point, just let us know. Email me if you want any advice, help, whatever.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's my role in job, is to see people like you fly. I will have my wings soon and depart. There are other people who need to carry on.
Thank you so much. I'm
Not a problem.
deeply touched. Take care and bye bye.
Bye.